Hey, good morning, everybody. Day 104 of spiritual healthcare. So, welcome. It is a rainy morning here in Edmonton. Anyway, I don't know what it's doing where you guys are, but it is a rainy morning here, and I hope you guys are having an amazing morning, day, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. It's like it's hard to know where everybody is because it's everybody's tuning in from all over the place. So it's good to see everybody this morning, and I hope you guys had a great evening yesterday. Some great topics coming in over the last couple of days, including should the government actually regulate paranormal exploration? So there's lots of interesting things to chat about today, as well as negative entities and bluff identities that they put forward. We've got a question that came in about that as well. So it's good to see everyone. Good morning to Marge and Patricia and Ed. Nice to see you guys. Nice to see everyone. Good morning to Jay. I see you're there. There's a bunch of people that pop up that I can kind of see. Good morning to Sally. Nice to see you. Sally says nice top. Thank you. This is actually by a designer here in Edmonton who I absolutely adore. Her name is Corey Richard Jones. She runs a company called Lewis Mayhem, and it's an amazing company. She makes most of my fire stuff, my fire clothes. And today I'm going to be filming this afternoon some fire performances and things like that. So so I am dressed and packed and ready to go as soon as spiritual healthcare is done. So yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, she does all that stuff. So lewismayhem.com, I highly recommend. Their stuff is amazing. Good morning to Dan. Good morning to Jay. Nice to see you guys. It is awesome to be here. I hope you guys are having, I know most of you are in a heat wave right now. We have rain this morning. Alberta weather is completely up and down. One day it's sunny and hot as hell, and the next day it's pouring rain. Today it's pouring rain and thunderstorms and humid, crazy humid. So I thoroughly expect to be completely just literally soaked by the time I'm done filming today. So that should be good. Should be sweating like crazy. But yeah, so lots of really great questions this morning, including, as I say, should the government regulate the paranormal research field, and talking about negative entities and bluff identities and things like that. So we're going to grab onto that. There was another question that came in that I thought was really good that I want to grab quickly before we actually start. And dancing, Mother Nature is suffering from the midlife crisis. Yeah, no kidding, hey? She has reason to, though, man. People have just... she's got reason to. She's can you imagine raising the human species? No, I can't imagine raising the human race. I can't even imagine raising one, let alone, a lot of us. No, that's why I have a snake. Right there. That right there, that's why I have a snake. Good morning to Brandy and Shadow and Kaz. Nice to see you guys. It's good to see everybody this morning. Tomorrow's spiritual healthcare. I'm hoping I think it should be quite good. Galen is eating dinner tonight. I was hoping that he would be able to come on tomorrow, and he still might. We'll see. But he's eating dinner tonight, which usually means he spends a day in bed. So we'll have to see how that goes, but he might be there tomorrow. We'll see what happens. So I wanted to grab onto some of this because I really loved this one question that popped up earlier today, and that was large versus small paranormal teams. Which is better? Should you have a pile of people, or should you only have a small group of people? What's the deal? So before we start talking about government regulation with paranormal research, and as well as negative entities and their crazy projections of children and all sorts of things like that, large versus small teams. So this was my story about this. I used to have, EntitySeeker used to have an actual physical group of people that would go from place to place, and I had actual assigned, it was a company, a team. But this is what I ended up finding was I found that people you kind of would hit your stride with people, where there were certain people that were supposed to be there at some times and not at other times. People would, there was a couple of people that, that they had their own issues going on in terms of, just personal problems and things like that. And it tends to, as soon as you make a group of people, you like, just on a psychological basis, it doesn't matter what kind of group you're talking about, you end up with some really weird dynamics that can start happening, including things like just people being catty, or people thinking they should get more of a role than they should, or they're doing more than they should. And there ends up to be this kind of nasty dichotomy that starts to grow. And I've had a number of people as well end up, sort of getting on the boat and then thinking that they could either sort of take over or something like that, or they think their 10 cents should be 20 cents kind of thing. And so what I ended up doing was I actually ended up just having resources around me. So I have like people that I can reach out to and contract in that are, Marge says it's like an episode of Survivor. Yeah, it really, it's just insane. It's just crazy. People go crazy when they're in a group. It's wild. So I end up just like having these people that I know that I can trust, that are contracted people that I can bring in. So like architects and psychologists and photographers and audio video and whatever. I work extremely close with the same people that do a lot of my fire stuff and whatever, and production stuff. I work with them with EntitySeeker as well. And they have their own production company, an audio video production company. And so they do all the audio video work and analysis and stuff like that. But you really do, it's funny, you have to be able to keep these people, you have to have these resources, because you can't do this on your own. But at the same time, when you start to actually form any semblance of group, it becomes a thing. People go really weird. So I don't do the group thing anymore. And people say, can you send me your resume? And I always say, yeah, I mean, it's great but it's great to have those people that are kind of like out there that you can reach out to. Like if I have like photography, for instance, I've in photographs, I mean, I have certain experience with photographs, but not the level at which a professional photographer is going to be able to examine something and look at it. So usually all of that evidence, if it gets sent to me, it goes off to someone else, because they're the ones that give their opinion. You can't know everything. There was a really great quote or incident with Ford, who when he was taken to court at one point, and the attorney that was cross-examining him was like, how come you don't know all of these various little details happening in your company? You must be completely checked out. And Ford replied, no. He was like, I don't know that stuff because I don't need to know it. I can outsource to these various areas. And he was like, my job is to be able to offer what I can offer and regulate, but he's like, I can hire on the people that do know, so that I'm not bogged down with everything. And I think it's really important is to have the people who specialize in that field, have them to be able to dole this stuff out to, so that you are free to be able to manage everything else. I think it's crucial. So this is such an interesting question. Moving on from that, I thought this was really cool. Is that, should the government, because we've got all these government regulations that are coming in right now for various reasons, should the government regulate the paranormal field as well? And I thought this was really interesting, because there are places around the world where the government has stepped in certain areas. For example, I believe it's New York. You're not allowed to charge for psychic readings. I think it's New York. The UK, there's certain areas of the UK you are not allowed to charge for being a psychic. And they try to stop fraudulent crap from happening. And it's really interesting, because should the government regulate a scientific scientific endeavor, but at what point is it not scientific anymore? It's a really, really big question. And, I think especially when you're dealing with issues, like scientific research and stuff like that, I think we have to be very, very careful, especially when we're in a field like this where we're not sure. Like, we don't know what the guidelines and procedures should be, because we're still figuring it all out. Should it be regulated? It's such a really hard question, and I think as soon as you get, government involvement in something like this, that could become a real problem. I like the idea of stopping, of course, the the fraudsters or the con artists and things like that. You know, if you can't charge, I think that's cool. You know, I think if you're doing this, you know, from the right intention, you know, that shouldn't be an issue anyway. But yeah, it's a really, really tough question. And, you know, I think we have to be very careful about where we fall in terms of government involvement in scientific research, because, you know, you end up getting agendas that get tossed in there as well. So that becomes a really big problem, or what they think should happen but isn't applicable to the field, and it's a mess. So the question was really good, but it's so complicated. It's really messy. So the one that I really wanted to grab onto today, and I thought this was really good, and I think this is such good fodder for today's morning, today's spiritual health care. And the question came in via email, and it was, why do some spirits project themselves as children? So this is such a good question, because it goes into the heart of, I think, a lot of paranormal cases that we read about, whether it be on haunted hospitals or Paranormal 911. We see it sometimes on those shows, and some various other shows as well. And of course, some very famous cases like the Picton House, the Sally House, places like that, where there's been, you know, a run of paranormal events that clearly don't seem like it's a child, but these people are having these, you know, horrific paranormal experiences, and you know, the entity that they're seeing looks like a, you know, sweet little girl or sweet little boy and whatever. And usually the hallmark of these of a lot of these hauntings is the fact that the entity itself seems to have a sob story behind them. So things like, you know, oh, I lost my mom and dad, I'm looking for my parents, what do I do? You know, I'm homeless, I don't know what I'm doing. So, you know, I'm lost, this kind of thing. And it's usually the story is very much catered to, you know, our want to help. So a couple of things about these cases. Stephanie and I, when we first started EntitySeeker, we spent a lot of time, about 10 years, digging through as many of these types of cases as we could, anything to do with negative hauntings and whatever, because we knew that if we could figure out, we didn't have to answer what they were, we just had to answer what the behavior was. And if we could understand the behaviors, then we could understand, you know, how to curb it or how to stop it in some way, and involving the people, right? Like figuring out what is it that people are doing, what is the dynamic that's going on between the people and this intelligence that seems to be projecting itself as a kid. Because I don't for one second believe it's a kid at all. I don't think it's, you know, spirits don't get lost, or, you know, kids don't get lost, and this kind of, it's nuts. It doesn't happen. But we do get kids, of course, entities that project themselves as children and create sob stories. So we have to start to look at that as for what it is, and it's very much a predatory behavior, right? You start to build trust, you start to groom the people around you, and then all of a sudden you've got this interesting relationship that tends to be very toxic. So when we deal with a haunting like this, we're looking for a few different things. Usually that projection is filling some sort of a role with the people that are involved with it. A lot of the time you'll get this type of haunting with kids, like with other kids, where all of a sudden they've got this new best friend, and it's like this imaginary friend, but their imaginary friend is kind of terrible, and is clearly not a person. You know, they're usually telling the kid to do terrible things, or you know, telling them that their family's gonna die, and all sorts of like not so good things like that. I had a case probably about 10 years ago now, and it was very interesting. The fellow that came to me, who's he worked with my ex at the time, and he had a little girl who was about 5 years old, and she was complaining or talking about Grandma Ghost. And Grandma Ghost was, and her grandma was alive, like it wasn't her actual grandma, but Grandma Ghost was very, you know, highly aggressive, but was her best friend, and would tell her, you know, that her you know, her father was going to die, or her father was evil, or, you know, all sorts of crazy things, and what was interesting was that this kid was typically very isolated anyway. She was kind of a strange little girl. Like, she was kind of an odd kid. But her parents at the time were going through quite the divorce. And she was kind of in the middle of that and whatever, but it kind of left her open to, you know, anybody that was going to come in, whether it be physical or non-physical, to come in and kind of fill that gap, right? Like, I've had cases so often where, you know, you've got a kid or, you know, a person who is stuck in the middle of something, and what ends up happening is that, you know, those people, or those negative entities, whichever it is, comes in and shows up and fills that role up. You know, this is oftentimes where we hear about, you know, kids being victimized by real predators, right? Like, real predators. And, you know, they find that person that they can bond with, or they can trust, or they feel that they can trust, and they get nurtured. And of course, the parents are so busy and they're crazy, they miss the warning signs, or they miss these, like, bits and pieces that are going on. And as their kid is kind of, you know, becoming more bonded with the predator, then you end up, you know, it becomes very difficult to take the kid away from the predator, because they feel like they're just buddies with them. And that they've got this very different sort of toxic, but codependent relationship, and it's not good. So with negative entities, it can kind of become the same thing. And with this child bluff identity that they put forward, it becomes very easy for people, both adults and kids, to end up in this kind of codependent relationship, because they believe that it's this child who's missing somebody or lost or something like that. And meanwhile, the entity's, you know, trying to burn their house down. Like in the Picton case, the Sally house, it would turn around and light fires, and, you know, it was attacking the husband terribly. He was bleeding with scratches and cuts and being bitten and all sorts of things. And meanwhile, you know, she's sitting there with her little pigtails looking all cute. And she fooled a lot of mediums, I have to say as well. She fooled a lot of mediums, you know, where they would come in, you know, be looking for the negative entity that was obviously there, and what they would end up picking up on is, you know, little Sally with her little pigtails, and she's so cute, and oh, poor me. So it's a very disarming image when you're looking for something that, you know, you think is going to be horrible. They use it in a very, very, very tactical way. So, you know, what is it? So what are these things that are creating this? So with negative entities, nobody knows specifically what it is. Like, there's no litmus test for this. But we can start to theorize when we begin to look at the behaviors and whatnot of these entities, and the situations in which they seem to manifest. They definitely seem to be the product of negative focused thought. And what's interesting about this is that they don't seem to create anything new ever. They seem to repeat things. They seem to repeat things that have been in their environment. But rarely do you see them ever create or manifest anything that's new. Usually, even when they're speaking, you know, they're picking up on words that are in the space, or accents that are in the space. They do a lot of mimicking and mirroring and things like that. So it's really intriguing. They don't seem to be, you know, something that is conscious, non-physical energy in the same way that or they're conscious, but they're not the same type of you know, physical entity that you would get with someone who has passed over. It's just different dynamic that's going on. So there is no litmus test for what they are. Every religion, of course, has got a different name for them, demons and all sorts of stuff. But, you know, as for what they actually are, you know, we can only kind of guess. And we know this to say that they seem to, these consciousnesses seem to grow out of incidents of you know, strong negativity or strong negative focus and things like that. And then they come up with these different behaviors. Some of the other ones that we ended up identifying were this one specific behavior that we titled the immediate aggressor. And the reason why we ended up identifying that one specifically is because usually there's no bluff at all. There's no faking of an identity or anything like that. But within about 48 hours, your house is a mess, and they've moved in, and they're usually very physical. So like ripping out drywall and, you know, attacking walls and biting and all this kind of thing. But they're very indiscriminate. Where with these entities that come in and they bluff as something else, They tend to be very a little bit more under the radar with their actions. They don't usually get physical quickly, where with the immediate aggressor, they don't care, and they'll attack investigators too. They don't they just don't care. And there's been a couple of deaths associated with those. I know of one investigator who got thrown over a second story balcony. Just crazy stuff. But yeah, so they don't seem to, but they're not people. They seem to be something completely different. And they behave very differently, even though they've got these predatory kind of instincts and whatnot. There's a fantastic book. If you guys ever get a chance to read it, it was by a very controversial author. His name was Malachi Martin, and everybody kind of has a different opinion on this guy because he's a very strange dude. He was a very strange dude when he was alive, but had some very interesting cases. And his book, Hostage to the Devil, is worth reading if you guys get a chance to read it. He goes through 5 different cases, and each case is, he breaks it down not only for the paranormal stuff itself, but what I liked about his book was that he gave this huge backstory on the people, the individuals, so you can see where the toxicity ends up growing, and the behavior patterns and the emotional patterns with the people, so that you can kind of see how it gets laid out. It's really interesting. And as I say, he's a very, very odd dude, and people there's a lot of people that had major problems with him, but his book is worth the read. And it's called, as I say, Hostage to the Devil, because of course he was a Jesuit. So the book is very religious because, of course, he was a Jesuit, so he's coming from that perspective. So keep that in mind if you decide to read it. But if when you read it for the case itself, like I found it absolutely brilliant. It was a really good book. So I wanted to, because we haven't read for the last couple of days, I wanted to read a little excerpt from Faith in the Valley, because there's an excerpt in here that I found that I thought was so good. And this, of course, is by Miss Iyanla Vanzant. It's a brilliant, fantastic book. All her books are amazing. It's really good. She's got one called Trust that I highly recommend. It's very good. But I thought this was really good, and I think it's relevant for what we've been talking about today. As strange as that is, because you wouldn't expect to find relevant stuff to this subject in here, but I think it is, so check this out. When you learn to identify yourself as a spiritualized individualization of good, the people and experiences in your life take on a completely different meaning. A spiritualized individualization cannot be abused, abandoned, or rejected. You can be tested, challenged, or prepared to make wiser choices. A spiritualized individualization of good cannot have low self-esteem, poor self-value, or low self-worth. You can have areas of perception or understanding that require refining and fine-tuning. When you understand yourself as a spiritualized representative of the source of goodness, individualized at the very point that you exist, you can no longer see yourself as poor, broke, in lack of, or needing anything. Instead, you recognize that your ability to withstand the ebb and flow of events, knowing that the more you expect, the more you will get. The more you intend to receive, the more you will have. The higher you raise your vision and standards, the greater will be the flow of good to you and through you. You see as you recognize, embrace and honor yourself as a spiritualized individualization of good. You invoke your ability to create whatever you desire to experience. In other words, you step into your power. And I loved this because I think it really gets to the heart of what we've been discussing. I think that it really does come down to a lot of that. You know, we talk about, anytime we talk about things like negative entities or whatever, you know, oftentimes people immediately go to, you know, okay, well then we've got to dig into, religion, or we have to dig into, some sort of, attack to get whatever this thing is out. And, you know, as we've talked so much about spiritual healthcare, it really is about changing your own vibrational set point so that you're just not on their radar anymore. And when I'm working with kids, in regards to these things, like the grandma ghost case was a good example. What was very interesting was that when you shine some light on the bluff, the entity will take off usually pretty quickly. And I find this with people as well. So here's the big takeaway from today. When I find that people or entities are being passive aggressive, they're not speaking their truth. They're just kind of like, they're running under the radar and hoping you kind of don't notice. And we see this with people too, right? Like even on a lesser scale where, you'll be talking with somebody and they're making these kind of underhanded digs. And they're making the underhanded digs. Like, what they're doing. You're not missing it by any stretch of the imagination. But what's interesting is that until you turn around and call it for what it is, they will keep doing it. Like, it doesn't matter what you do or say. They will keep doing the thing. And I think it's really important to be able to turn around and to be able to call them out, as hard as it is sometimes, depending on who it is. But to be able to call them out for it and say, like, look, I know what you're doing. With the grandma ghost thing, it was very interesting. When I talked to the father about it and I said, here's what you're going to do. I was like, here's what this is. Here's what you're going to do. And my advice to him was not to go after the entity. I said, what you need to be able to do is partner with her. You need to partner with your daughter, because if you go after the entity will pull your daughter in a bit closer, and your daughter's going to start seeing you as the person who's trying to rip her best buddy out of her life. I was like, it's not going to work for you. But you got to partner with your daughter. And when you start plugging in and there's that contrast, that dynamic contrast, you're going to see this thing go away. And what was so fascinating was I had that discussion with him. And when he got home, his daughter came to him by herself, didn't know where he was, didn't know what was going on, and she said, I guess, Grandma Ghost has left. And said that anytime I need to call her, she will be there. But she said, Grandma Ghost said she couldn't stay anymore and she had to go find another little girl. It was very interesting, and they never heard from her again. Or it again, I should say. Shouldn't use her, but it. They never heard from it again. But that partnership, and knowing that partnership is there, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. And that's ultimately with kids too, right? Like if you've got a kid in a bad situation, the parents, it's so important for those parents to like plug in and partner with that kid so that they know that home base becomes their measuring stick and their litmus test for everything else that is coming in. If it doesn't match up with that peaceful, loving guidance and energy, then they automatically know that this is like, something's not right. So it's really important. So anyway, that being said, we've got to do our affirmations today. So everybody take a breath. I'm a channel of peace and well-being, and my need for peace is abundantly met. I unconditionally accept, love, and appreciate myself and who I am. I recognize and am grateful for the abundance that is constantly flowing into my life, which I can choose to allow or not. I feel with every breath a sense of peace and love. I help others by maintaining and tending to my connection with Source as much as possible. This well-being is accessible to me, even in a sea of uncertainty. And at this moment, all is well. I'm able to liberate myself from my past and live with peace and serenity. I can see and appreciate all the beauty and abundance in the life around me. I'm able to embrace love while letting go of fear. And I find peace with the soothing silence of my inner being. Everybody take a breath. Thank you guys for this awesome, awesome, awesome morning. Tomorrow's spiritual healthcare is going to be in the evening. So tomorrow we're not going to be doing morning. Tomorrow we're going to be doing evening. It's going to be 7 p.m. Mountain Time. So it'd be a special time period. I'm really hoping that Galen is going to be there for tomorrow. We'll see what happens. But so tomorrow evening, I will see you guys for 105. So we're going to be doing that. So don't forget, mark your calendars, mark your time, Mark your alarm clocks and all of that stuff. I don't know if you can mark an alarm clock, but I'm going to say it anyway. So tomorrow, 7 p.m. Mountain Time, and I will see you guys then. I'm going to post reminders tomorrow as well, so that anybody that wasn't here this morning will get the reminder. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. Mountain Time for spiritual health care. So I will see you guys then. Bye, everybody.